We're going to look in this session at compliance, retention, the protection of the data. So unlike before lunch, where we looked at the protection of the individual, the identity, and I intentionally locked out one of my users just because I didn't get to do that demo earlier. So this is a user Adele. She's blocked by conditional access. That's how it looks like if you're in the Teams web client. Whereas if you were in office.com, your sign-in was successful, but you don't have permission to access this resource. Okay? So that's the sort of thing that conditional access would kick in for you. Who remembers how long it would take before that would happen? Louder. 2 minutes of conditional access will kick in, but if you've still got a token, an hour. There was a couple of people. There was one there. There was one at the back. Somewhere over there. Okay. For those of you who haven't worked out what they are, okay, they're headbands. No, they're not. Okay. They're beer coolers, or the 1980s looking tennis. Okay. Right. They give them out at Ignite for beer coolers. They give loads of these out, not enough beer. That's why we've got plenty of spare. Okay. Okay. We've got loads of questions. We have questions afterwards, so we'll have them for questions in the Q&A as well. Okay, right. So, data compliance or data protections, should we say? Because there's a whole bunch of different things that we can do. Steve mentioned in the exchange session that we've just had, he was talking about things like DLP and data holes and options like that that exist in Exchange Server on-premise. Exchange Servers had the option to hold your data, the option for data loss prevention for a number of years. When Exchange Online was released, some of that functionality was immediately available, and then it became available for different options as time went on. So, for example, in Exchange 2010, and the equivalent to what was called Wave 14 in Exchange Online, to the original Exchange Online, there was a feature called legal hold, or litigation hold, the ability to hold all your data forever. So your mailbox would be on litigation hold, and the user could go and delete their data. So you delete a mailbox, not a mailbox, you would delete an item, it would go into the recycle bin, and you could empty the recycle bin, deleted items, and the item would be gone as far as the user was concerned. There was ways to recover that in Outlook, but ultimately it was gone. With legal hold in place, or litigation hold in place, the item wasn't gone, it was just gone from the user's view. And arguably, actually, it was gone from the administrator's view as well, unless the administrator was a compliance administrator. So there was a certain level of administration rights that were needed to be able to view this data after it was deleted. So you could distinguish between your, let's say, IT admin role, managing users and stuff like that, and your data admin role, where you could look at the data that was deleted, do searches against it, and so on. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about here today, they can be set up by your admin role, but actually to look at the data, to see the impact and to see what it's doing, you've got to be a compliance administrator. And there are many, many roles within Office 365, Azure Active Directory, and all the associated different portals. And different people can have different rights to do things. So for some organizations here, that'll be fairly simple. There'll be a smaller or a more sort of general IT team. Everybody does whatever, and the roles will be very vague. You'll have a role and that's it. Whereas there'll be some organizations here where it'll be your job to be specifically the data recovery manager or something like that. Okay? And so you'll only have those rights. Okay? We're not going to go into how to set specific rights in our session, but just keep that in mind, that not everything I show here, you as an admin can do, okay? Except that you as an admin could grant yourself permission to then do it. Okay? So that's one to watch out for. If you're in a highly regulated industry, just because you have the right to give someone a right to do something, doesn't mean, of course, that you should, but you might have to give someone the right to be able to do some of the things that we are going to show here. Okay? I've tried to preempt a lot of that and given myself the permissions I need so I can do the demos, but certainly if you took this away and tried it in a brand new trial tenant, not all of this will work immediately, And if you try this in your production tenant, if you're an admin in your production tenants, you might not have the rights, or by default, you won't have the rights to see the data that we're going to look at protecting. Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about, let's bring up a page. Let's pick that one. No, not that one. Actually, no, I'll start here. So this is, if you can see the URL, compliance.microsoft.com. Okay. So it's a new portal. There are many, many portals in the cloud. Compliance.microsoft.com. Another portal related to this is security.microsoft.com. Microsoft have had for a number of years the Security and Compliance Center, which was protection.office.com. Okay? Protection.office.com still works, but the idea is that they're going to move away from protection.office.com, which has security and compliance stuff in it, into two portals, the security portal and the compliance portal. Okay? And so in about March, they released the compliance.microsoft.com portal and the security.microsoft.com portal. But a lot of the stuff these two portals do isn't actually working yet. Okay? All they are is shortcuts to protection.office.com. So if I was to go in here, for example, and have a look at, if I went, let's say, classification, let's do policies. Policies, data loss prevention. Okay? It opens up another tab and takes me to protection.office.com. Okay? So you could just preempt that and go, I know where the DLP rules are. They're in protection.office.com, and go straight in there. But I sort of recommend let's try and do it from the compliance route, because one day, probably with not a lot of notice, this will turn up in the compliance portal, or the security stuff will turn up in the security portal. It won't necessarily disappear from here. What you'll probably find is new functionality in addition to what you've got will turn up in the compliance or security portals. Okay? So although these demos, I'm just going to go to where I know they are, try and start from the compliance portal, try and start from the security portal, so that you keep up to date with what's available. Okay, so let's have, I went to DLP, I'll come to DLP later. Let's have a look at data governance and retention to start. Okay? The ability to protect my data in the cloud. We don't need to back up our data in the cloud from a classic sense of data backup. Okay? Data backup, extract the data, stick it onto something, I'll say tape, but we don't mean tape, of course, stick it onto something in a different location, okay? And then do that again tomorrow night, do that again the night after, and so on. Okay? That's how we would have protected data years ago, and would often, hopefully never, need to actually go back and get those tapes and restore the data, but would find that when we restored it, did it work? How successful were we? Did we take our backups and actually restore them to make sure our backup was working? How does that work in the cloud? Well, when my data is stored in the cloud, obviously you need to be aware of what the features of the license and the product you've bought are. But if we're looking at the Microsoft cloud, if we're thinking about it from the E3 licenses, so Office 365 E3, we talked about E3 and E5 licenses earlier. E3 licenses contain what's normally called the Plan 2 component. Okay? So for example, Office 365 E3, I'll say it slowly, so Office 365 E3 contains Exchange Online Plan 2. The Plan 2 licenses come with the compliance features. But Office 365 E1 comes with Exchange Online Plan 1. Okay, so the numbers are all over the place. So E3 contains Plan 2, E1 contains Plan 1. Okay. Plan 1 does not come with the compliance licenses built in. So everything we're going to talk about here, you need the Plan 2 functionality for. Okay, so that would be Exchange Online Plan 2, SharePoint Online Plan 2. Okay. And for Teams, Teams stores its data in a number of places, but from a compliance perspective, Teams stores its data either in an Exchange mailbox or in SharePoint. So as long as you've got SharePoint Online Plan 2 and Exchange Online Plan 2, you can do most of the stuff here. Okay? There's some stuff that's in the E5 license, and we'll mention that when we get to it. Okay? But this, to start with, as long as you have the Plan 2 license. Okay, so retention policies. How do I force the retention of data, or how do I force the deletion of data given certain conditions? So let's start with data retention, because we were talking about backup. Okay? I want to make sure that the data that I write to the service is retained for a certain amount of time. I might decide I have a 10-year data retention policy, and I might have a very basic idea of, we used to keep our backup disks and we kept them for so many months or so many years. In the cloud, we're not charged extra for our data retention, so let's have an amount of time. You might decide that you're going to do it forever, which will be the equivalent of the legal hold we were talking about in exchange earlier. You might decide, I'm going to do it for a certain amount of time. Okay? So it's like legal hold with an end date. Okay. So how does that work for SharePoint? Well, how it works for SharePoint, which will be your files that you store in Teams, they get stored in SharePoint. How does that work for SharePoint? Well, SharePoint will store stuff in the SharePoint document library, and as you modify it, it will create a version. Okay? As you create a version, it will store those versions, because they're changed, in the retention hold. There's a number of different terms for the retention hold. That's detailed enough for now. Okay? So as I make modifications to the file, there's a version. And from the user's perspective, they can go and pull back older versions to look at. So the user has the ability to do self-service restore if you want. So it's very easy to do self-service restore. In fact, if you're running the latest Office license, versions of Office, Word 365 Pro Plus, for example, in the title bar, you can click the title and it will drop down and it will show you versions. And you can open up another version straight from inside the application. It's really easy for the user to recover a version. If you're running the monthly channel, it's possibly semi-annual now, but if you're running the monthly channel for Word, Excel, and so on, it's really easy to recover your data. Okay. The general idea behind the data retention, though, is I say, let's have a license, or let's have retained data for 10 years. And so I might make a retention rule that says I'm going to retain all data for 10 years based on, and I can either be based on when I created it or when I last modified it. So for SharePoint, for files, I tend to go for the last modify. I've got customers, they'll have made a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet, the whole business runs around that one spreadsheet. And every day they add some new data to the spreadsheet. But the spreadsheet was created 20 years ago, for example. Well, you wouldn't want a retention hold against that item of data that was based on its creation date. Because let's say you had whole data for 10 years based on when it was created. It was created 20 years ago, and accidentally I delete it today. Well, there's a few days before it actually really gets deleted, and we can go into those details in a bit. But generally speaking, what would happen there is there's no retention on that item, because it was retain it for at least 10 years from when it was created. Well, it was created 20 years ago, so I don't need to retain it. But that sort of document, and generally this does work for documents, I might say I want to retain it for 10 years from when it was last modified. So the file is modified every day. If it's accidentally or maybe intentionally deleted, I've got a copy of that. For whatever reason I might need to keep a copy, I've got a copy that I can recover for the next 10 years, because it was 10 years since it was last modified. On the other hand, chats in Teams, emails, they don't tend to have modification dates. An email arrives. Yeah, they can get modified, but they tend not to be. Chat messages, you write them, and then you write another message. You don't tend to go back and edit the message. You might go back and delete it and so on. So they don't tend to have the concept of when it was last modified. So for team chats, for emails, you might have a retention policy that really is on creation. And from an email perspective, on creation is the arrival date. So when it arrived within your mailbox, that's the creation date of that item. So it's not when it was sent, but when it arrived, but they're usually not much different anyway. Okay. So we set a policy that says, I'm going to retain for X days, weeks, months, years, whatever, based on date of creation or date of last modification. The policy takes about 24 hours to apply across all of the different services that are available. And so you can turn it on. It's really easy to turn on. I'll do some demos of turning it on. But you can say, well, by tomorrow, I've got it covered. Yeah, I've gone into customers and they're like, we need some quick wins with Office 365. And we're like, okay, retention policies. Retention policies are a quick win. But you've then got to look at, okay, well, actually, do I have GDPR statements of intent on my organization? You know, have I said I will only keep this data for so long? Have I said I won't store that data for more than a few months or stuff like that? So although, yes, it's really easy to come in and do what the demo is that we're going to do shortly, you do have to consider what the data retention general ideas, the policies of your company are. So not the policies we create here, but they're more, we've said we will only keep PII data for. Okay, so I was at a customer a couple months ago, and they said, they've got it on their website, that they will keep a CV that you send them for a job application. They will keep it for 6 months after the job is filled. Great. Try and do that as a policy in Office 365. Okay? The Office 365 policy, well, I can do the 6 months, but I can do 6 months from when it was created. That might be when the email containing the CV arrived. Okay? Or it's 6 months from when I last modified it. Well, I'm probably not going to open up their CV and modify it for them. Okay? There's no concept of that as a workflow. It's like, this other event happens, therefore I will delete this content. Okay? So you don't get those sort of functions, but you've got the ability to put workflow or that sort of thing into it. So for example, and this is newer to Office 365, so less likely that you may know this, you can now do labeling and have a retention policy based on a label. Now the way that works is, rather than it being deleted based on modification date or when it was created, the user, if you have the E3 licenses, the user flags or tags the item. So they can label the item. They say, this is a financial document. This is a confidential document. This is a HR document. So you pick your label and you give a definition to it. So you create your label in Office 365, and you need a client that can support that. And that's where actually this whole thing breaks down, because the clients don't tend to support labeling. The web clients do, but the rich clients don't. We're not there yet. But the idea goes that I take the document, let's say that CV that we were talking about, and I might label it as CV. Okay. And then I have a retention policy based on the label. Okay. So rather than going, okay, all my data will stay for 10 years, I might have all my data excluding this set of labels, or all my data excluding these document libraries, or all my data excluding those mailboxes. Okay. Gets deleted at a certain amount of time. But those document libraries, mailboxes, Office 365 groups, or whatever, they're on a different deletion policy, or they're based on the idea of labels. Okay. Let's have a look, because it makes a lot more sense sometimes if you look at some of the stuff that we've got here. So I've got a, let's zoom in a little bit on this. Okay. All right. So I've got a policy here. Let's call it, this one's it's called PII retention policy. And this was created as part of the demo tenant that I'm looking at. Okay. So the policy is on. So I could turn the policy off and it would stop applying without being deleted. Okay. I give it a name. I can't change the name. So I tend not to put the duration into the name. So if I said keep all data for 10 years as my name, well, I could go and, I can't change the name, but I could go and change the duration later, and that sort of puts a sticker on the name as well. Okay? So I tend not to put, I tend to recommend don't put the duration into the name, but a name which you can't change the name. But everything else you can change. So there's the description, what it applies to, and then the actual settings of it. Okay? So in this example here, you'll see Teams doesn't appear on this one. Okay? So when this was created, it wasn't created with Teams in mind. I'll create a new one in a moment and we'll do Teams on it instead. But this is going to do content in Exchange, SharePoint and OneDrive, and Office 365 groups. Teams writes channel messages to an Office 365 group. So Teams is affected by this, but it's affected by the fact the data is stored in the group rather than Teams specifically. So we can put retention specifically on Teams. We can put retention on Office 365 groups or mailboxes or SharePoint libraries that therefore affects Teams. So when you set up retention policies, it's good to know where data is stored so that you know what's going to be affected by that. Okay? And this is a labeling one. So it's detect content that contains sensitive info and do a 7-year keep on it. If I have an E5 license, I can do detection of content and auto-labeling. So I could set rules for the label. So for example, I could say, if the document contains the word official sensitive, that would be a UK government classification. If the document contains the word official sensitive, then mark it as official sensitive and keep forever, for example. Okay? And so the user doesn't need to go and tag the document as official sensitive. It becomes official sensitive because they wrote the words official sensitive into the document. Okay? And you might have rules, it's like official sensitive with a space between, or official hyphen sensitive. But if the document had the word official up here and sensitive somewhere down here, it wouldn't fall into that rule. It wouldn't be the word official and the word sensitive. It would be the phrase official sensitive. Okay? And you can have much more complicated rules than just the existence of a string. Okay? That would auto tag the message if you've got a high enough license, if you've got the E5 licenses. If you've only got the E3 license, the user would have to flag the message. But when they labeled the message, when they labeled the document or whatever, when they labeled the item, that would get the retention policy applied to it. So 7-year keep. Okay. And we'll come and have a look at building one of these out in a moment. But what does that actually mean in terms of 7-year keep? Well, what it means is, if I do nothing to that document, if I don't delete the document stays in its repository, be it an email or a Word doc in SharePoint or whatever. Okay? The document will just stay there. 7 years will come by and go away again. The document is still there. Okay? Retention only applies if I actively delete the document. Okay? So I come and delete the document, or I delete the email, okay? And I had one that said, keep for 7 years from date of last modification. So let's say, for example, I modified a document on, let's say, the 1st of January. Let's keep my dates simple. So I modified a document on the 1st of January, 2019. So today, we're about 7 months away from having modified it. 7 months will do. Okay. Let's say I had a retain for 1 year from date of last modification. So on the 1st of January was the date of last modification. Today, July, I delete it. Okay. The document will stay around for a further 6 months. Okay. Because the 1 year retention expires 1st of January 2020. Okay. The retention doesn't expire in July 2020. It was retained for 1 year from date of last modification, not retained from 1 year from when I deleted it. Okay. So for example, if I deleted it on the 31st of December, it would be retained for a day. If I deleted it on the 2nd of January, it'd be retained for 360-something days. Okay. Because it's retained from the date of last modification. So if I delete the document today, I've got 6 months to undelete it, to recover it. If I do an e-discovery search and I'm going looking for stuff for whatever reason, I can recover it for the next 6 months. But come the end of that period of time, that item will get deleted. Now there's a window, depending on whether it's Exchange or SharePoint or whatever, there's different windows of different amounts of time. That document will hang around for a bit. So with OneDrive and SharePoint, it's 93 days. And so sometime in that 93-day window, it will be gone, not to be recovered again. Okay. So sometime February, March, next year, that document that I delete today is gone and I can't recover it because I had a 1 year retained from when last modified. On the other hand, if the document was created 20 years ago and I had a retained for 1 year based on creation date and I delete it today, it goes immediately into that 93 days. It's almost gone. So by the end of the summer, it's gone, and I've got no recovery. Okay. So you have to take into mind it's not the date of deletion, but it's the policy on the document that affects how long the document's going to hang around for. So if I never delete that document, it's not going to disappear. Retention policies hold data for a period based on when I delete it, because I've deleted it, based on when I either created it or based on the last modification. Okay. So if I never delete the item, it never goes. Okay. On the other hand, I can have deletion policies. Deletion policies actively delete. Okay. I've got customers who are like, we keep stuff a year and that's it. Okay. If we want to make this an official record, we store it somewhere in our official records database. But everywhere else, usually for freedom of information request, if it's anywhere else, we don't want to keep it. Okay? And so they'll have an active deletion policy of 6 months or a year or whatever. So a deletion policy, it will go. Okay? Whereas a retention policy, it will not go unless I choose to delete it. And if I choose to delete it, it will go based on the retention. Okay? And then the last thing in that is keeping, is what data source that applies against. So let's create a policy, because that can make a lot of, help cement a lot of stuff we've just done. Okay. So let's create a new policy. We're going to do anything? Hello? There we go. Okay. So give it a name, give it a description. Remember, I can't change the name. Next. Okay, so I want to... That's very strange. Okay. That's probably the zoom. So let's reset the zoom for a moment and see if that stopped wobbling. Yes, it does. Okay. All right. So I want to retain it for 7 years from when it was created. So I just changed the bits I want to change. So for example, let's leave it 7 years, but let's change it to last modified. Okay. Do I want to delete it after this time? No. So that would be a retention policy for 7 years, no active deletion. So when the document is 7 years old and I haven't deleted it, it will stay. Documents will hang around until I choose to delete them. But if I said yes, the document would be kept for up to 7 years and then would be actively deleted. Okay. So the first one is probably safer than setting, if you set a really low number and actively delete, watch your data disappear. Okay. Whereas if you set a really low number but don't set a deletion policy, it will only impact your ability to recover stuff in the short order. It won't cause you to lose stuff in the short order. So setting yes in this option here is much scarier than setting no. Okay? And then I could just do delete content older than, tidy up the old stuff. Okay? That's just a deletion policy. No retention. It will be deleted if it gets to that age, okay? Even if the user does nothing about it. Okay. So 7 years, based on last modified, retention policy. What locations am I going to have against it? So I can see I've got a whole bunch of different locations. So I can say certain mailboxes, certain SharePoint sites, OneDrive locations, Office 365 groups. I can choose all, or I can choose the specific mailbox or location or whatever. Okay. If I scroll further down, I'll see I've got public folders, team channel messages, and team chats. Now, if I say team channel messages, it turns off all the other locations. Okay? A team's retention policy is mutually exclusive than one of the other retention policies. Okay? Apart from the fact that I can do the chats as well at the bottom, I can turn both those on in the same policy. But I can't have, let's say, Teams, and Exchange. If I turn Exchange on, it's going to turn off Teams. So if you were looking for, let's say, a quick win in Office 365 and go, let's protect all our data 10 years, okay, you probably end up with two policies. One that does all of your data sources apart from Teams for 10 years, and then another policy that does Teams for 10 years. Okay. And then you go, okay, if anything gets deleted by mistake, we've got a copy for 10 years, we're sorted. That's your easy one. And then you go and look at the real detail and what your GDPR rules say and what you've promised other people you'll keep or not keep data for, and then that's when you tweak these rules. Okay. So I'll leave that one as Teams. I can edit everything. Here I can change the name until I click Create. Okay. After that, I can't change the name. Okay. And it'll take about a day to apply. Various things in the background pick up these settings and then apply them to the services. And so they say, give it a day before it's you go off and test it or so on. Okay. So I take the Evolve demo and scroll right down to the bottom. I've got one new option down here at the bottom. I didn't get this option in creation. Okay. It's called Preservation Lock. Preservation Lock stops me making any change to the policy from that point onward forever, even if I'm global admin. Okay. With one exception. I can store stuff for longer, but I can't store stuff for less time. Okay. I think it's Sarbanes-Oxley, US law. Okay. There's a requirement in US law that you have preservation holds, data holds, that the administrators cannot change when they're turned on. Okay. If you're not subject to Sarbanes-Oxley, don't turn this on, okay, because you'll find you can't turn off the policy afterwards. It's going to apply. Okay. All you can do is make it longer. You can't make it shorter. Okay. So you can't weaken the policy or remove it. Okay. So that one's one to be very careful about. Okay. So you create your policy, and as I say, it will come off and it will apply over time. And actually, let's go back into that one. And if I clicked Edit on this one, for example, there we see it's got Teams. So because I chose Teams in creation, I can't now change it to Exchange. But when I created it, I had a whole choice of which data sources I wanted to protect. Okay. But once I've committed it as a Teams policy, it's a Teams policy. If I opened up one of the other examples I've got, it had all the others, but it didn't have Teams. I couldn't make them into Teams policies. So that would be, and it's relatively easy. It's not a complex process to go and create a very basic, time-based policy. So,
how do these retention, do they care about licensing? So, for example, I mean, we haven't looked at this for years, and back when we did Exchange Online, we did a litigation hold on the actual mailboxes.
okay.
Because obviously our shared mailboxes aren't licensed, so we can't technically litigation hold them.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was to do this and apply it to Exchange and say all, what would it?
Okay. So the question is, does this care about licenses? Okay. Yes and no is how it cares about licenses. Some of this is on a basis. Okay. So if I set this and say everything, okay, some of the stuff like SharePoint, it's going to keep it. Okay, even though it was created by someone who didn't have a compliant, a P2 license. When the license is specifically assigned to a person, though, so a mailbox, okay, then it will matter what license they've got. So, for example, if you want to do compliance on shared mailboxes, the shared mailbox needs a license. Okay, and it won't work otherwise. Okay, behind the scenes in all this, there's different processes that run depending on the service. So, for Exchange, it's the MFA, I can't remember what it stands for at the moment, but there's a process behind the scenes, managed folder, something like that. The MFA. MFA runs in the background, okay, and it's sort of like guaranteed that it will run at least once every 7 days against your mailbox. Okay. So things like delete content within a day, you're not going to guarantee that a day will work because it might not actually run the thing that actually cleans up your mailbox every day. It's not a real-time type thing. But if you go keep for 10 years, well, it might be 10 years and 4 days sort of thing. So yeah, so don't expect it to be exactly. But MFA won't run against your mailbox if your mailbox doesn't have the license for it.
So if you put the policy in, and if I'm not licensed to share mailbox, it just won't do it.
That's right. It just won't do it. Okay? But then although you've got a policy that says protect all, you need to know it's not all. Yeah. Okay. And then there's other processes that run in the background for SharePoint and OneDrive and so on. Similar ideas. They'll protect everything and then look to see what needs does it need protecting and so on. So for example, within SharePoint, if you say, keep all data that has the word Contoso in my company name, for 7 years, when you go and actively edit a document or you delete a document, it will keep a copy of the document in the preservation library. Later, it will look to see if your word is in there. Okay? So when you trigger the cause of retention, as in I'm going to delete or I'm going to modify the document, it doesn't look then to see if the document needs to be protected or stored. It will just protect or store it. But sometime in the next couple of days, it will go, oh, that actually doesn't contain the word Contoso, I can delete it now. I don't need to keep that copy. Okay? Whereas that's probably just a performance thing. Okay? That's less important. It's just that's just how it works. You don't really need to know that. Okay? So from a user perspective, I've got retention. I can do retention based on dates, like the demo I've just done. Or I can create labels. That's actually the Activity Explorer. I can create labels, and then I can get users to assign labels by hand. And in a label, I can have a retention policy against it. Or I can have labels with rules, and I can say if the words match the label, then you will label it, and then the retention applies.
How does it handle conflicts between those?
How does it handle conflicts? So let me get this right. If you have two policies, let's say one that says delete, or one that says retain for 5 years, one that says retain for 10 years. Okay, is that the sort of thing you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a deletion policy that's clashing with the retention.
Yeah. So retain for as long as possible, delete as quick as possible. Okay. So if you had a retain for 5 years, retain for 10 years, delete after a week. Okay, it will retain for 10 years and then get rid of it within a week. Okay, so retain for as long as possible.
So the retention policy is always on.
The retention policy is always honoured. Yes, if you say keep 4, okay, and you also say delete less, the delete won't apply. Okay, because the retain wins. Okay, but what that means though is, let's say you had a retain for 5 years, delete after 6 years. Okay, so retain for 5 years from whatever trigger, on creation or on last modification, doesn't matter. Retain for 5, so you'll keep it for 5 years, okay, as long as you actually delete it sometime in that window. Keep for 5 years, delete at 6 years, okay, well that's going to delete it a year later. Okay, it's not 6 years after the modification, so it's not 11 years in that example. Okay, so it was, let's say, delete document, or sorry, retain document for 5 years, from date of modification. That's one policy. And the other policy is delete after 6 years from date of modification. So you modify the document, you do nothing with the document, it gets to 5 years, you've done nothing with the document, it's still there. You get to 6 years, document's deleted, because there was a delete at 6 years. On the other hand, you've got a document, a couple of years in, you delete the document, so it goes into the bin. It will stay in the bin for 5 years, because you've got to retain for 5 years. At 5 years, and it's not actually, sorry, it won't stay in the bin 5 years. It'll stay in the bin until 5 years from the trigger has gone by, and then it will be destroyed. It won't even reach 6. Okay. So in terms of clash, they work. It just takes a little bit of thinking about. We'll keep it for as long as we need to, and then we'll delete it as quick as we can. Okay. So if you had we had the example earlier, I've got a litigation hold on the individual mailbox forever, okay? Because that's a per mailbox setting, when you create a new mailbox, you have to go and set it against the actual mailbox. This, if you set this in Office 365, it will set that for you. So if I had a retain forever Office 365 policy, that will turn on a forever litigation hold on all my mailboxes for me, and I don't need to remember to turn it on. So if you have a working policy at the moment that is, we'll go into each document library as it's created and set a policy, we'll go into Exchange as it's created and hopefully not forget, or we'll have a script that runs every month and we'll turn this on, okay? This will apply within days of creating of the mailbox for you. Because team chats and team documents are stored in Exchange and SharePoint, it's the Exchange and the SharePoint policies that apply as well. Okay? So I've got a slide somewhere where all my team's data is stored. Let me find the one I want. Is it that one? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So, chat. Okay. Running the Teams client. I'm doing some instant messaging. I'm doing some IMing. Okay. I've got a chat service. Okay. That's the thing that makes the chats appear up in real time. It's a service that runs in Azure. It writes the data to what's called the O365 substrate. Now, the O365 substrate is a basically Exchange server. Okay? Microsoft store everything in Exchange server. Okay? They just don't call it Exchange server anymore. Okay? They call it the O365 substrate. Okay? So it's basically a very large Exchange database, if you want. Okay? Against that, that's where your email goes. This is email. Okay? So if you email an Office 365 group, okay, or you email a Teams chat, a team, that's where that data goes. One-to-one chats, they go into the mailbox of the person doing the chat. Okay? So if I was having a conversation with any one of you, okay, within my tenant, the one-to-one chat that I'm having with you would be in my mailbox and your mailbox. Okay? There's a hidden folder inside my mailbox called Team Chats. If you open up your mailbox with MFC Mappy, you would see it, for example. If you do a discovery against a mailbox, you'll see these items in the Team Chats folder. It's a hidden folder. There are loads and loads of hidden folders within your Exchange mailbox. Okay. Group chats, one-to-many. Okay. If that's in the, they're stored in the Office 365 group. Sorry, no, correction, that's where the channel messages are kept. Group chats, one-to-N, one-to-many people. Okay. They're stored in the individual people's mailboxes. And if it's a team chat, it's stored in a channel called channel message. It's stored in a channel. That's stored in the Office 365 group mailbox that belongs to that channel that's spun up when you create that team. Okay. So that all goes into Exchange. Files I create, they go into the SharePoint library. Okay. And we talked earlier today about private channels. And private channels will make another SharePoint library, okay, rather than having a mess of permissions within SharePoint. Okay. So things like OneNote, OneDrive for Business, so on, stuff goes into SharePoint for that. Okay. Third-party add-ons to Teams don't fall into any of this. So if I add in a third-party add-on in Teams, data retention is based on whatever the third party is doing. It's not valid for this. Their data is stored. It may not even be stored in the Microsoft Cloud. Okay. So when you add third-party services in, keep in mind that the retention that you've created only applies to what they call first-party services. Okay. Third-party services, the third party may or may not have a retention policy in their service. Okay. And then we come into the compliance features, and any of the compliance features therefore then apply to the first-party data that's stored within the team mailbox or your mailbox or against the SharePoint site. All right. All right. Another one we can do in terms of retention, because actually retention is quite hard to demonstrate. I can turn it on. You know, I can wait a day. I can delete something, and it disappears. And you're like, yeah, it's been deleted. That's what's supposed to happen. Okay? But then I wait a bit longer, and then I go in and do a search for it, and that's when I see that it's still around. Okay? But actually, it will still be around anyway, because it's probably gone into a user's bin. You have to wait quite a while to prove that it's still there. Okay? So things like demoing retention policies or doing proof of concepts on retention policies, where you've got to retain for 1 week, doesn't really do anything. But then retain for 10 years, you're not going to run a pilot for 10 years to make sure it really got deleted at the end of the 10 years. So it's quite tricky to do a good demo with retention policies. But it's quite easy to turn it on and go, right, that's on. That's working. There's not lots of bells and whistles to it. It's not hard to get right. Okay? But the only thing you can really get wrong with it is either you set a active deletion policy on a low number, okay, or you set something that's contrary to your GDPR requirements. So it's not wrong, as per se the cloud might say, but it might be wrong to what your industry so requires you to do. Okay. Let's have another look at another data protection that we've got. Data loss prevention. So data loss prevention was in Exchange Online, and is up in the cloud. And over time, Microsoft have added it to other services as well. Okay? It takes a couple of hours for a data loss prevention policy to kick in. If you're running a rich client like Outlook, it takes 24 hours to apply to the client. So it takes a little bit longer to apply these policies into the client, Excel, Word, Outlook, and so on. But you can do them into Teams a lot quicker, especially if you use the web clients. They tend to work much quicker in the web client. So if you do demos or you want to try this stuff out, recommend trying it in the web client. Okay? So I made one earlier this morning. Okay? I called it UK Financial Data, so let's have a look at my data loss prevention policy. I've got some simple 7-day graphs, charts at the top, that show me hits against my policy. They are relevant for yesterday's data. So you'd have to come back tomorrow, most of you are, hopefully come back tomorrow for the other bits of the team thing. I won't be here tomorrow, so I can't show you what this would look like tomorrow, although you've got my tenant tomorrow, haven't you? So you could open this tomorrow and prove that the data is there's a 2, or whatever it is, on the DLP policy. Okay? So the reporting is next day. It's not real-time reporting, but it's real-time blocking or real-time restrictions from the user's perspective of this. Okay, so I've got a policy. It's enabled. Status is on. I didn't give it a description. It's going to apply to Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Team Chats. So unlike retention policies, DLP policies can apply to everything in a single policy. And then for a policy, I can do, out of the box, if I just run the wizard, I can do what to do for low volume of content and what to do for high volume. By default, low volume is 1 to 9 instances of the thing that I'm looking for, and high volume is 10 or more. Okay. So I'm going to show you what the policy currently has, and then I'm going to demo it. So apply to everything. Let's click Edit and have a look at the policy settings. So I've got low volume, both are turned on, both low and high are turned on. For low volume, let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger without it wobbling again. Okay. So low volume. Now I've changed what would be the normal rule. Normally it says detect contents that are shared with people outside my organization. Okay? But for my demo, I just want to share it internally. It's just to get the thing to work. It's easier to send a team chat to somebody else in my tenant than it is to send it outside, just for purposes of the demo. But normally if I ran the create a new DLP rule, it defaults to outside. Okay? But I can change it to inside, okay? Or both. You pick a sensitive data type. There's about 90 different data types in there. You can upload template documents. So for example, let's imagine you're an insurance company and you've got a standard form that someone might fill in, okay, for buying insurance or whatever a broker might supply. And so you've got a document that has a certain structure to it. Okay? You can upload the empty document to Office 365 and it will basically do a fingerprint on it. It will say, okay, that's what the document looks like. Then, if you upload a filled-in version of the document, well, the filled-in version is only about 5-10% different because all the forms and the boxes and the layout is all there. Okay, it's now got the data. It's now an important document. But actually, the words, my name, my address, and so on, that's a small bit of all the data in the document. So I can upload these empty templates and say, I want to make sure that I can't email or I can't share that form when it's completed outside the organization. Okay? And so it will do a thing called confidence. I'll upload the filled in document and it will go, okay, it's slightly different than the empty document, so I'm 90% confident it is the empty document with a bit of data in it. And I might say, well, if I'm 75% confident or more, I'm going to block it. So confidence comes into a lot of this as well. For example, I could have a credit card number. In fact, this demo here is going to rely on credit card numbers. I have a credit card number. Well, a 16-digit number arguably could be a phone number as well. You know, how confident am I that the telephone number, it's not a telephone number, it's a credit card number. Now, it's more than just string matching. Okay? There are rules that define credit card numbers. Okay? So it has to match that rule. From a credit card perspective, it's called the Lund 10 algorithm. It has to pass the Lund 10 algorithm. Okay? I had a client who phoned me up once and said, we're trying to do DLP testing. It's really not working. And he said, I sent you an email. I'd seen the email a few moments earlier. He says, it's got a whole bunch of national insurance numbers in it. You shouldn't have got it because we've got a block saying no national insurance numbers going out. And I said, where did you get the national insurance numbers from? He went, I made them up. I'm like, well, that's why I'm getting them. They're not national insurance numbers. They look like national insurance numbers. 2 letters, 6 digits, and another letter, because reading his own off in his head. 2 letters, 6 digits, 1 letter. But actually, that 1 letter, there's a whole bunch of rules that determine that 1 letter. There's only about 5 letters, I think, that last letter can be. My client was doing, 2 random letters, 6 random digits, and a random letter. That's not a UK national insurance number. And so it was coming out. Okay? So I said, well, try the email with your own national insurance number. He was like, oh, yeah, that worked, he said. Okay. So it's not just string matching that's going on. It's a bit more intelligent than that. So in this example here, I'm going to demo with a credit card, but we've got debit card and SWIFT code, so banking type stuff. Okay? And I'm going to notify the user with a policy tip, or if it's an email, I'm going to tell them in email. Okay? If it's a high volume, scroll down a little bit. Okay? And if I clicked edit rule, I would see there, it would say 10 or more instances of, okay, where low was 1 to 9. So I might decide that actually high is 5 in my organization. I'd run the wizard, it would make high equals 10, I would go and change high to equal 5 with that 80% confidence. I might want to go high is 5 with a 90% confidence. So I can tweak a lot of the settings. But if it's 10 or more, restrict access to the content, notify the user with an email if it's email, or a policy tip if it's not an email client, send an incident report to the administrator. So let's have a go. Let's see what we can do. So, oh yes, she can't sign in, can she? He says. Let's turn off the conditional access rule that blocks Adele from doing anything. Should have done that one earlier. Off. Okay, all right. Let's try this. So this is Teams. I'm signed in. It's going to reset the size on that. I'm signed into this one as the administrator. And I made it earlier. Let's kind of scroll down there. So earlier on, before the rule kicked in, Adele sent a credit card in Teams. Okay, that's not a valid credit card number. It passes the Lund 10 algorithm. So it's a good one for testing. 4 and 3 ones, then 4 ones, 4 ones, and 4 ones. The other bits don't matter. Okay? But what it's doing is it's looking for, in this case, a 16-digit number, Lund 10 rules pass, and other bits of confidence. So nearby is the word Visa or MasterCard. Nearby is CVC or CV2, the card verification code that you get the 3 digits on the back. Okay? And there's a 3-digit number nearby. Okay? So there's lots of stuff there. It's not just a credit card number. It's highly confident that it's a credit card number. Okay. So let's try and reply to Adele while the, thanks. My card is also. And Visa CVV 456, expiry 10/21. Okay, and so it sends the chat, and what I'm doing is I'm waiting for it to go, ha, you can't do that. And hopefully it's not going to ignore me. Oh, there we go, brilliant. Okay, so the message was flagged. So that's the policy tip. Okay. I can click the link. It goes, this is a piece of content. Remember, it's because I've shared it with Adele. Adele is internal. If this was an internal chat and the policy was external, that wouldn't have blocked. Okay. So I could tell, for example, the person buying my train tickets what my credit card number is internally, and it wouldn't have blocked it. That's the reason why I put the internal blocks in my rule. Okay. What can I do? Let's click the link. There we go. It's a credit card number, protected by policy, and I can do reporting and stuff like that. I didn't allow it, do false positives, and I say it's a false positive, and here's why it's a false positive, and stuff like that as well. So there's more stuff that I could add to that. Okay. Let's go reply here and go 1, 2, 3, make up a number. There we go. Visa CVV 23, expiry the first of the first 19. Okay. And we should find, unless I'm very unlucky, that that doesn't get flagged because I've just made up a number. Okay. On the other hand, oh, wrong person.
Why didn't they get flagged?
Because it's not a credit card number. On the other hand, I have all the credit cards of my employees. No, I don't. Let me paste Excel. Go on, there we go. Okay. Now this is the one I haven't tried. Okay. But there's 10 in here. 7, I think there's a few more. There should be 10 there. That should get blocked. Okay. It might not. I actually have to send the message as well. That helps. Okay, there we go. And it took about 5 seconds or so, maybe 15 seconds. Last time, bingo, there we go. Brilliant, that works. I like when demos work. Okay, so that was more than 10, or 10 or more. Okay, the confidence was, it was confident enough that they were numbers. Okay, all those numbers are, they're not real credit card numbers, but I did actually search the internet when I built that demo a number of years ago, looking for credit card numbers. Okay, but there are ways of making numbers that match the Lund 10 algorithm. Okay, so I know they all work. So for example, that starts with a 5 and the type's MasterCard. Visas don't start with 5, Visas start with 4. Okay? So if that was a number starting with 4 but didn't have the word Visa in it, it would have less confidence of being a hit. Okay? And as I said, there's 90 different data types out there. Okay? And that's just the built-in ones. Okay? I can go and write my own rules with regex. I can go and upload my own documents. Okay? So it's a very powerful engine. Okay? So where's this? This is the Mark 8 project team general. Adele should be allowed to sign in now. Because I've taken away her...
That number of hits, when does the counter get reset? If they're all individual messages, do they get through?
We could try that later. I suspect they're all individual messages. It's actually a good question. I don't know whether, if I put 10 individual items in, it will go and block all 10. I've not tried that one. Okay. That's what Adele sees. Okay. So Adele knows the administrator's been naughty. All right. That took about 3 hours to kick in. I made that this morning. I tested it at lunchtime. It was working at lunchtime. That was about 5 minutes after I set it. So give it a couple of hours, it kicks in. Okay. And the administrator would have got an email and a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay. So that's DLP. Okay. Arguably, it's no different than DLP in Exchange Online. It just looks different in the Teams client. Okay. It's fairly new to the Teams client, though. Okay. So that's some of the data loss stuff that we can do. How am I doing for time? Okay. 20 minutes, yeah. Okay. Of course you can.
Can you upload your own reference data, like that database?
Can I upload my own reference data? So that example I was talking about, the blank form idea, that's generally how you would do that. Okay? If the data is very dynamic or ad hoc, or just you can write regex rules, and you can, it's basically create a whole bunch of XML. I wrote some blog posts on it 8 or 9 years ago. I've had one person, and there's nothing else on it really on the internet on it. I had about one person phone me up and say, we're interested in expanding this further, and it never went anywhere with it. You can write your own rules. When it's, let's say you had a database of usernames and passwords. Okay? Effectively, it's all just words. Okay? I have heard publicly, rather than me breaking any NDA, I have heard publicly Microsoft are looking into the idea of looking for the word password in documents. Okay? So you would have a DLP rule that you could scan everything and go, or a data loss, a data a search engine, go and find where people have written down passwords. Okay? The reason for that is if someone does a hack against your account and gets in as your account, one of the first things they do is scan all the data you've got for useful things like, so if I got in as your account, for example, I'd scan your entire mailbox looking for the word password on the assumption that your IT department has emailed you and said, here's the VPN endpoint and your VPN password is. That sort of thing. The second thing they'll go and do is download your address book, so they've then got a targeted list to go and hack against. So if I can do a deletion policy against a password and run it against all my mailbox, so it's not just the word password, it's variations on a theme, and it's the international words for passwords, got to fit them as well. Could I go and clean up records of passwords that are stored all over the place to try and protect my infrastructure against a malicious attack? And so I know they're looking into that, and I understand they're running it internally within Microsoft. Whether it ever works well enough that they'll release it. But you might consider, we'll do e-discovery in a moment, you might consider, let's do an e-discovery, let's see where the word password is written down all over my organization. That would be an interesting exercise. But just ad hoc, non-schemed data, it's very hard, next to impossible. But what DLP doesn't do is it doesn't block, actually it'll read attachments. So if I put a Word document in, and I took that Excel document, for example, and I stuck it into SharePoint. In fact, that Excel document is stored in SharePoint, and I've got a specific exclusion against the library I keep it in, so that I don't have it blocked for when I come to do demos with it. If I store the Office documents, CAD documents, and a bunch of other document types, it has the ability to read them. If I uploaded a encrypted zip, it hasn't got the ability to read it. Okay. But I'd use something else to block, the sending of .zip outside or stuff like that. Basic attachment rules within Exchange or stuff like that. Okay. Let's just, before we leave here, click Edit Rule on the high volume of content detected, and wait for the pop-up. There we go. Okay, so any of those, I can add some more. Minimum of 10, maximum of any, 85% confident. Okay, and they're just the basic rules. But I could go and tweak all them if I wanted to, but I didn't do any of that. I just ran the wizard and got that. Okay. And across the top before I close it, there's all the reporting. So if I want to know who's overridden it or what incident reports, I come in here to look at the report as well. So as well as setting it here, this is where I view the incidents and the hits against it as well. So I'm going to discard those changes, and just very briefly create a policy. Obviously I can't demo, but let's say, let's do medical, UK medical reports. It's going to look for National Health Service numbers and National Insurance numbers. So it knows what they look like. Next. It's given it a name. I could give it a description. Next. Everywhere. Next. Find content that, and then detect if shared with. So that would be the default, outside. If it took effect immediately, I'd change that to inside and send a Teams message with a National Insurance number in. It doesn't take effect immediately, so I won't change it. But people outside my organization. Advanced, that's where I can go and tweak all those individual bits. But next. Show users a tip. If it's less than 10, if it's more than 10, block and send an incident report, or restrict an access. That's where I'd block. Okay. Test it out. What that will do is it will show me as the administrator the stats. Yes, I have this number of hits. If I say show policy tips, it will tell the user that the data might be restricted, really should they be sharing it. But it won't block it. Or I say turn it on right away, it will enforce the rule. So you could create it in as quick a time as it took me to create it there. It kicks in a few hours, but you could have it just reporting. But do come back a few weeks later, do look at the reports, do come back a few weeks later and go, okay, I'm now going to tell the user. Okay, I'm now going to block it. You might find actually if you do it in audit mode, then nobody's sending credit card numbers externally. You're like, brilliant, my staff are fantastic. Okay? That shouldn't be a reason not to turn it on. If no one's sending it, absolutely turn it on. Turn it on with a hard block. Because that one day accidentally in the future, when they accidentally send the travel spreadsheet or whatever to an external person, okay, they might not send it frequently, but you want them to stop it, that one accidental hit. Okay. So there's no DLP rules on by default, but it shouldn't be hard to create one, and it's easy to pilot and then move to production very quickly with them as well. Okay. So there you go. Yeah, it took that 5 minutes, including me telling you what he was doing, to talk about it. Okay, close. Briefly, and then we'll come on and do some search. Supervision policies. You need E5 licenses for supervision policies, E3 for the previous stuff. Supervision policy. It looks for data that you consider to be, let's say, in an education environment, or actually a work environment as well, bullying, malicious language, hate. The supervision policies, there's actually machine learning behind supervision policies, where you can say, if the tone of the document could be considered malicious, discriminatory, bullying, etc., you can block it and have someone review it, and the reviewer can release it. Okay? So you've got automatic for stuff like that. So you find people are, and you as employers have a responsibility to protect your employees. This is, okay, technology doesn't solve everything, but it's an interesting way of looking at and certainly getting a view into bullying or hate within organizations that you really don't want there, but you may have no visibility into. Okay? So supervision policies do on that. They, ways to demo, not on a big screen like this. Okay. So I turned that on in my own company, and it's boring because nothing ever happens. Sure, the bigger the company, the more stuff you're going to hit. But you want the thing to be careful there, so you want to make sure the people who are the supervisors are the people who have responsibility for that, not don't turn it on as an admin and then let the admin look. It's not the admin's job to supervise this thing, it's a HR responsibility. So HR look, but admin can turn it on. Okay. What else have I got in here that I wanted to show you? That's data loss prevention. Okay. Permissions, that's where you set who's allowed to do what. Okay. So a lot of the stuff that I've done so far, I can just do as being an admin. The next thing I'm going to show you, I can do as an admin, but I can't see the data. I'm going to do a search. Okay. Earlier today, I gave myself a compliance data administrator so that I can look at the data. It may not have taken effect by the time I come and do the demo in a few minutes. But there's other rules in here, a compliance administrator, an e-discovery manager, that would be another one. There's different roles. Click on any of the permission roles, it tells you what rights you get. But by default, your admin can't look at other users' data by default. Okay. So if I go and have a look at e-discovery. So I ran this one earlier just to save a bit of time. In my team, some of the messages that were going by in my team, the message visual, the word visual was one of the words in the team. So I did a search query, typed in a keyword. There's lots of complex things, visual, a word near another word, or two words together, or this and that and not that. So there's a complex search language you can type in to do search. But for simple demos, I can type in a word. Okay? I can add conditions. I can set locations. So I said Teams when I set the specific location. I did a search and run, okay? And I ran this earlier. To preview the results, go to your compliance admin and ask them to give you permission to look at the data. So I could create the search, I could run the search, but by default as an admin, I couldn't look at the data. Okay? I can, from over on the right-hand side, choose search statistics. Okay? And that tells me it's found some data. So for example, in mailboxes, so if that was a one-on-one chat, that would be an Exchange mailbox. It found the word visual 24 times in Exchange and 5 times in 3 different SharePoint sites. The size of the items that contain them, okay? And that's because I'm looking at the statistics. Now, a couple of hours ago, I ran this. So let's see if I go individual results and just hit refresh, whether it's going to let me actually look at the data that goes with that. I suspect not. I'd have to log out and log back in, but it might do, because I've left it a few hours. Okay. So I created a search case. The idea for search cases is I can, as a compliance admin, I can create the case, and then I can hand the case over to someone else to look at the data. Okay. There doesn't need to be an admin to do that. The case contained one search query. So look at the results. And no, it still hasn't kicked in yet. So I can't see the items because I didn't give myself permission early enough and log myself out and back in again. But I could. We know by looking at the search statistics that there is data in there. Okay? So I could give this case to someone and go, your job is to go and review that. Does it contain confidential or secret or whatever, whatever reason I'm looking up that data for. Okay. I can also, with a search, this was just a search, go and search for it. Okay. I can also export the data to a PST file. I can hand it to someone else to look at. Or I can put a hold on it. That will make a retention policy for the data that matches that rule. So for example, I might have a, let's car manufacturer. Car manufacturer is building a new electric car. It's a big secret project, and they give it a name. Let's say they call it Acme, the new secret project. They do a search. Where has the word Acme been mentioned? Right, let's put a hold on it so that it can't be deleted for so many years, or it can't be shared externally based on the keyword. So from the search, I can build the retention policies and other rules that I might want to protect my data as well. And, because we're mainly concentrating on Teams, that would affect Teams just as much as it affects email and so on.
And they be deleted as well? Can you execute deletion?
Yes. So if it was my usual demo in this, well, it's not a demo, my usual comment in this is someone sends a racist joke. I could do a search. A racist joke, I send it to everybody. It's in someone's sent item, but it's in everybody else's inbox. Right? So the people who got it in their inbox, well, unfortunately they got it, but they're not at fault. But someone put in their sent items, that's the person, or it went in someone's inbox and their sent items, they forwarded it on. So you can use some of the more obvious stuff. Of course they could have moved it, and it wasn't me, I sent it and moved it back to the inbox. But if they sent it and deleted it, well, it would be in the deletion holds within Exchange, and you'd still see it. So yeah.
And you can delete from them, and you can execute.
And I could do two things from that. I could do a HR violation, so the HR, the business rules of good behaviour within the company, but then I could actually go and delete that message. Yeah. And you can do that for spam and phishing and all that sort of stuff. The problem with spam and phishing is they tend to be so different all the time that your spam and phishing engines are what protects you, and good education for your user. But when it's accidentally shared content or something that shouldn't have been emailed internally or in from the outside, you tend to be able to say, okay, it's got this subject, it had this sender, it was this time frame. There's what I'm going to key my search on, remove. Yeah. Oh, that's the one. Yeah, data privacy. Data subject requests. This is basically search for a person's name. So if someone issues a data subject request to you, I'd like you to tell me where you've got my name within your data. Okay? That allows you to create a data subject case, DSR case. It will ask you the name of the person raising the case, and then it will write out the search rule to go and find references to that person's name across your online data, okay, or across your first-party Microsoft data anyway. Okay? And so if I open up this case, for example, and there's no mention of the person in it, choose searches. And the thing of interest I'm looking at, once I click through a few of these boxes, oh, there it is, actually, there it is there. find Brian J or Brian Johnson or created by Brian or the document, and the document is note, the conversation, voice, missed voice, voicemail, Teams message. Okay? So go and find all the stuff that that person did or made or was mentioned in. Okay? And all I did to make that search query was say the person of interest is Brian Johnson. And it did that for me, okay? Based on its display name or its object. Okay? So a data subject request is an easy basic search, but there's a wizard for making it easy to do. Okay. Right. What have I got left that I wanted to show you? Data loss prevention, done. Archiving, just as it's on here. It's really easy to take a team and archive it. In other words, make it read-only. And then it's later really easy to unarchive it and make it read-write again. Okay? So the functionality exists within the product, basically to stamp it with an archive attribute, and you can't then write to it. Okay? There are also, it's not mentioned on my rough notes, you can do deletion policies for teams. You know, the team hasn't been used for X amount of time. Okay? So you might have not just the data, we've been talking about the retaining or the deletion of the data, you can also do the retaining or deletion of the team that contains the data. Okay? When you create the team, okay, you're the owner. You created the team, you're the owner. You will get an email telling you that your team hasn't been used for 180 days. It's going to get deleted. Click here not to delete. So there's stuff like that built into the product as well. I think that's a higher license again as well. That's the E5 licenses. You've got, what else did I want to mention on here? Oh yes, new coming, I think starting to roll out this week. Information barriers. You can Google information barriers and find out more about it. But this is where your organization has a legal requirement to make sure two groups of individuals can't communicate. So for example, it could be traders within a financial organization. One's buying and selling shares in a company. The other one, or in an industry, the other one is in the job of getting a company ready to list publicly. They know some insider information. So within that sort of organization, and there's plenty of other examples, within that sort of organization, there's legal requirements that they don't communicate. It doesn't stop them meeting down the pub and discussing, but it stops them in your remit, the sharing of data between them. Okay? So information barriers will do things like stop you adding a person, so you might have two groups. You might have, let's say, a really simple example, traders, investigators, that'll do. Okay? So you build an information barrier that said traders and investigators can't communicate. Okay? So you go to a team, and it was created by a trader, they can't add investigators to it. Okay? And vice versa. It was created by the investigation department, they can't add the traders to it. Okay? Or you've got the team, they do both belong to it, and then you turn on the information barrier. It will mark the items they previously created as read-only, and it will stop them. It'll basically kick them out of the team. It will stop the other party carrying on and joining it. Okay? So you could think of an example where someone did work for the trading department, got a promotion, and is now working for the investigations department. Okay? Same user account, the teams they belong to hasn't changed, but because they've changed group, the teams that they can actively participate in has changed because they're now the other side of the ethical wall. They're now the other side of the information barrier. Okay? So that's new to Teams. Okay? And there's a couple of things there that say what happens. So you can't screen share between two sides. You can't phone them and stuff like that via Teams. Okay. For that, you need the top license, Microsoft 365 E5 license, okay? Or E3 license with the advanced compliance add-in, okay? Which will give you a lot of the search functionality we've just demoed, but it will give it to you on an E3 license plus the advanced compliance license as well. Okay. I think I'm done with all the different things I wanted to talk about. Done e-discovery. Okay. Those last two things on there. Everything in Office 365 is audited. Okay. And then MCAS, the Microsoft, I can never remember what it stands for, cloud proxy. Okay. So it can filter your web traffic to other third-party services. There's various MCAS licenses available as well. You can go into MCAS and do things like block the sending of this data to Salesforce or third-party service. Less Teams, because Teams is a first-party client. This is more when you're talking to third-party services. So if you had tabs in Teams that went to third-party web services, MCAS could fit in as a proxy to block the traffic to those third-party services and implement blocking of data and so on as well. Okay, that's much more beyond the edges of Teams. Okay, so that says 4 o'clock, almost exactly. We're going to have a quick 5 minutes, stretch your legs, okay? Grab a water if you need to. We'll finish with a Q&A in here for our day. So have a quick wander for 5 minutes, and we'll call you all back in and think of your questions. Thank you.